Edward loves you. It was a relief to get away from Montague Hall after that awful day. I kept thinking about Brother John. I could hardly think about anything else. He was my favourite person in the world next to my father. I missed his jokes and his riddles and his happiness. I even missed our difficult conversations in Latin. Night after night, I dreamed about the hooded hangman coming to drag him to the scaffold, and I woke up screaming and sweating. There was no one I could talk to about it. If I told Mother Jack, she would have filled up my head with even more frightening stories. I was afraid, too, of going back to the king's court. He knew about Brother John. He had had him killed, but had spared us. Why had he spared us? Did it mean he'd forgiven us? Or was he just biding his time? I had no idea, and every second that I spent in Hampton Court I was afraid. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I felt sure I was being watched. Everywhere I went, everything I did. I listened for whispers. I looked into shadows for the hangman. But I had work to do, and the prince in his funny little ways helped me through my nightmares. He had learned lots more words while I had been away, and he chatted all the time. He was shy of me at first, and then he remembered me. He followed me everywhere, towing Mother Jack along behind him too, as if they were riverboats and I was a royal barge. "He's missed you," said Mother Jack. "He wouldn't even ride on his little pony without you helping him. But I couldn't send for you because of the sweat. Nobody was allowed to come here in case they brought it with them. Nobody left the place either. We have to keep the little prince out of harm's way. Oh, the scrubbing that's gone on here, every wall, every floor. Tell me about your big world outside, William. I'm starved of gossip." But I had no stories to tell her. And now I had come back, I wasn't allowed to leave the grounds again. I felt as if I was in prison. I dreaded the thought of ever seeing the king again. But in October, it was Prince Edward's 2nd birthday. The king invited 1,000 guests to Hampton Court. In they flooded, bringing all the noise with them. There were banquets and pageants for the whole week. Musicians from all over London were called in. Everyone dressed up, flirted, simpered, laughed. The king's tumblers jested and skipped and kept my prince amused. I didn't smile once, but nobody noticed or cared. I knew my Uncle Caro was watching me. I knew Lord Howard kept his eye on me, but I just got on with my work. I didn't want King Henry to notice me at all. All I could think about was that he had caused thousands of his own subjects to be killed. He didn't care whether they lived or died, as long as they obeyed him. I had known that and hardly grasped it. I had been so proud to be his son's page, but now he had Brother John hanged. He had ordered his men to come to my father's house and snatch him away from us. Now I understood how cruel he was. I understood why people were so afraid of him. I never wanted to see him again, and yet I couldn't get away from him. He dominated my life. He owned me. One rainy afternoon, Mother Jack told me to take Prince Edward to watch his father playing tennis. His other servants bowed as we passed them, then followed on behind us in case they were needed for anything. I held the little boy up to the grilled window so he could see the game without being harmed by the wall. I watched the fat, gross man who thought he was chosen by God, lumbering and sweating as he played, and I saw how weak he really was. He still had a stinking wound on his leg that never seemed to heal, in spite of all the physicians he called in. He limped rather than swaggered these days. The noblemen who he was playing tennis with him were kind to him. I could see that. He rolled the ball gently against the wall rather than slamming it, so His Majesty never had to reach out or run. But still King Henry sweated and heaved until it was clear that he was in too much pain to carry on. He kneeled down, hugging his bad leg. The wound in it gaped open. Blood and yellow pus oozed from it. Servants rushed to help him, and he swept them away, furious. He limped out, reeking of sweat and the sour wounds. His nobles clustered round him, bowing deeply, murmuring concern. He bellowed at them for fussing over him. Then he saw me with Prince Edward. I kept my eyes lowered, but His Majesty called out, "William Caro?" And I bowed to him unwillingly. He limped towards me and put his wet hand on my shoulder. "Edward loves you, young William," he said. "You're like a brother to him. Sometimes I wish you were his brother." All the courtiers standing round us laughed and clapped, and so did Prince Edward. I blushed and bowed my thanks. I was the king's favourite, after all. There wasn't much I could do about that. But for how long? I clenched my fist together, tight, tight. I wanted to scream out loud, "Let me go, let me go!" I wanted to be anywhere in the world except at Hampton Court. At last, the whole glittering court took to their barges and sailed back to London. The palace sank in a swoon of exhaustion. But at least I had the freedom to ride Black Tudor again in the afternoons, and to take my falcon and release her into the sky. Lucky, lucky, clever, to be able to stretch her wings as far as they would go. During one of my archery lessons, my tutor, Sir Andrew, was called away. It was a blue, bright, sharp day in late November, a day that was full of surprise sunshine before the deep winter set in. Prince Edward was chattering, waving his teething stick of coral in the air as if he was painting the clouds, and Mother Jack was singing to him in her dreamy way. I had a little nut tree. They were both muffled up in furs against the cold. I put down my bow and arrow and waited for Sir Andrew to come back. I watched the drift of the last golden leaves from the great trees curling and curling like lazy dancers on the way to the ground, and I thought, I wish this moment could last forever. I was actually happy. Say goodbye to Prince Edward, William, Mother Jack called. He's going for his rest now. Bye, Wims, I heard the prince call. Mother Jack laughed lightly and walked away. How I wish now that I touched Prince Edward's little hands and smiled at him and wished him well. I crouched down by the linen cot, idly collecting up my arrows, daydreaming, and suddenly heard the sound of someone hurrying across the ground. I jumped up guiltily, thinking it would be someone coming to tell me off for laziness and disrespect. It was Sir Andrew. His face was tense and white with worry. William, your father needs to see you straight away, he whispered, catching his breath. My father? Is he here? No, he sent a messenger to fetch you. A boat is waiting at the steps. I looked up at him, puzzled. What could be so urgent that my father would send for me? Did he have bad news for my sister? I've brought you a cloak. It'll be very cold on the river when the sun goes down, Sir Andrew said. I'll walk you down to the landing steps. He glanced round to see if anyone was watching us. Then he looked at me gravely. His eyes were sharp with concern. I must warn you, there are serious problems at Westminster. There is danger everywhere. Danger? What do you mean? But Sir Andrew was looking away from me. We were within earshot of the oarsman. Maybe he had already said too much. He handed me onto the boat where my father's messenger was waiting, and then walked briskly away as if he had never spoken to me.